BCS ISSG tonight with presentations on secure by design. Present. Yeah. Stores. I'm Rob Wilson and I'm on the committee of the ISSG. Steve Sands, who's going to be here tonight, he's the chairman of the group, but unfortunately he's got COVID at the moment, so he's a bit unwell to come, so I'm standing in for him. The two speakers we've got today are both from BT. Ian Taylor is going to be talking about secure by design. And anybody who came to the industrial park, a meeting we had back in April, you've seen Dean speaking there. And then we've got Ishmael Salomon, who's going to be talking about designing offensively. So, and then that'll take us up to 7:30. We'll have Q&A after that. And at 8:45, we'll have closing networking. And 8:30 we leave. So anybody new to BCS and ISSG, the BCS is the Chartered Institute for IT and has 70,000 members in 150 countries. And local branches and 50 specialist groups. And the latest group is quantum computing. Wow. Might be dear to some people's hearts, but certainly something we're looking at BT. And what is the ISSG? It's the Information Security Specialist Group. There's 3,500 members. Concerned with all aspects of information, forensics, hacking, cloud security, and everything in between. And the companies of the BCS ISSG are quantum computing, cloud, third party, and AI and cyber and standards. The next event that the BCS will be running, the ISSG, is a joint one with the DevSecOps group, and that's on secure system architecture and design, which will be on the 24th of September. And a bit of housekeeping before we start. There's no Chatham House rules because we have many attendees registered. So the chat is open for attendees to monitor during the session for issues. Questions and answers, please post via webinar. So we're actually Zoom tonight, so we chat on Zoom. Questions will be collated for Q&A sessions following the presentation. Outstanding Q&A will be emailed after the event. The session will be recorded and published on the ISSG's event site. So the speakers tonight, we have Dean Taylor. Dean is the Senior Manager of the Security Consultancy practice. An engineer and problem solver at heart, Dean has 12 years experience in senior cybersecurity roles and a lot longer in design architecture and core networks. And Ishmael comes from a data development and machine learning background, working as a consultant for the last 7 years. His particular focus on secure by design principles and strategic planning. This focus has orientated primarily around cloud security, supply chain, and corporate assurance processes. So if I can hand over now to Dean, who do secure by design.
Thank you very much. Just bear with me a second while I get the technology going. Robert's not showing screen 2 anymore. Oh, because the dongle's not plugged in. All right, I'll start, yeah. Good evening. I'm kind of surprised you've come out of the sun, which has finally come out, to come into a basement to hear me talk about secure by design. Really appreciate it. So for some time now, we've been learning and refining how we approach this subject of secure by design at an enterprise scale. So, of course, secure by design is not a new idea. It's been around for a number of years and can mean different things to different people. So my part of this presentation will focus on the people and process aspects of secure by design. And then Ish, my colleague, will be talking later about the technology and architecture aspects of it. And hopefully that will give you a well-rounded view of how we at BT Group approach secure by design. It's fair to say at BC, being a reasonably large company that it is, we make thousands of technology design changes a year. Some small, some big, and there's a lot in between. So secure by design is a foundational first line of defence principle for us, and absolutely something that we must get right. We also carry the label of critical national infrastructure at BT Group. So it's really important for us to make sure that we deliver secure by design consistently. So the goal of secure by design aims to tackle all of that technology change, embedding knowledge, skills and mindset to do it proactively. However, to be successful, it needs to be integrated into the business as a core requirement, with robust assessment, comprehensive guidance, and be able to quickly learn and adapt. I think the biggest regret of security, some say, is it comes to the party too late or is sometimes not invited at all. So this is why the goal of secure by design is important for us. So first, some definitions, and hopefully you won't find these terribly surprising, but for us, it serves as a goal for all of our secure by design principle, and that with every change comes consequence. So what you want is to get involved as early as possible. Some say this is shift left, but for us it just means get the right security designed in before it's too late to make a difference. And hopefully that means something to you. And that's an umbrella to secure by default, which just means get the default configuration is usually the most secure settings, or should be the most secure settings. So it's important for us to say what we mean and mean what we say as far as doing secure by design, and really this is what it is. So both goals serve as a foundation for everything that we do, and it's absolutely embedded within the DNA of the way we provide that service within BT Group. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about me, because I love to talk about me. So my electrical engineering background took me to the London Stock Exchange, London Underground, various construction projects around London, and then I ended up at a company called Nortel Networks. Who remembers them? They don't exist anymore, right? This is one of the biggest companies in the world at one point. So like everyone else at Nortel, I was made redundant. And then I joined a company called One-to-One, which was a fledgling mobile phone company in the early 2000s. One-to-One became EE, and then EE became, T-Mobile, and then T-Mobile became EE. But before all of that, my actual path into IT was as a network administrator, working on RAF bases. I did a lot of the installs, and then they need someone to look after it. So I found myself alone in the Network Operations Centre on the 31st of December 1999, when at midnight absolutely nothing happened. Good old Y2K. So yeah, I then moved around various architecture, solution design, or networking roles in the mobile phone companies I've worked for since as they've evolved, and then moved into IT, into cyber security. I've been doing that for about 12 years. I currently lead the Secure by Design consultancy with a great team of people, including Nish around me, helping to keep BT secure. Outside of work, I like to tinker with things, electronics. I build multi-rotor drones. I also hold a private pilot's license. So I like things that fly, generally. But this learning to fly has helped me to gain new perspectives on things, especially around security. So I'm a bit of a nerd. I do spend some time with my family when I'm not doing nerdy things. And that's me standing in front of a Spitfire, which I was lucky to have hands-on for 10 minutes or so, an absolutely wonderful experience that I won't forget. Flying is not without its risks, and I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. They say that if you're afraid of dying alone, become an airline pilot. But in all seriousness, we know that flying these days is the safest form of travel. But in the beginning, for all pilots, it's just you and a tiny engine Cessna. Thank you very much. Thank you. So in the beginning, it's just you and a tiny engine Cessna. And like driving, you start off with an instructor who sits next to you. But then after about 15 hours, you go solo. Now, that sounds really completely unlike driving where you pass your test before you go solo. And going solo is creates mixed emotions, somewhere between exhilaration and absolute sheer terror. A bit like a data breach, so I've heard. But going solo generates those emotions, but it helps you to understand the perspectives of personal responsibility, learning that actually flying is actually risky, that requires a lot of preparation. Anyway, the point of all of this is that flying is deep-rooted in principles and knowledge, and much the same thing can be said about secure by design. Because consistency in aviation is about having the right knowledge, the right skills and luck. So we know that flying can never be 100% safe, as well as nothing can never be 100% secure. So luck is always a factor in risky endeavours. And the aviation industry has had to learn this the hard way ever since the Wright brothers first flew. But luck is where preparation is opportunity. So flying is safety critical. Preparation is absolutely everything. Maintaining the plane, pilot fitness, meticulously planning, weight, fuel and balance, the impact from the weather, air traffic control, and then executing checklists to perfection, which are there to prevent silly mistakes from becoming deadly. Opportunity to succeed in aviation is only limited by your ability to prepare and then understand the threats and hazards which may compromise safety of the flight. All of this in a highly dynamic environment where preparation, if it doesn't exist, things can go very bad very quickly. So I'm asking you to indulge me just a little bit. The goal in aviation is to land exactly the same number of times as you take off. That's the goal. Yeah? And it's funny, because in the logbook, and this is my real logbook by the way, is they actually have a column which says that you've actually successfully landed. Never really understood why that's there, because if you haven't, then how would you write in the logbook? But anyway, and a failure is when you run out of skill and luck, as some might call skill talent. So hopefully me standing here is proof of my consistency, if nothing else. But many of the ingredients of successful flying relate to secure by design. So in this presentation, I'll be talking about the knowledge, skill and preparation we use to get consistency out of that. So here's our Wheel of Fortune. So this has been a long time coming, but the essential message around secure by design is it relies upon 5 key components. Getting visibility of the landscape, so that's understand what's going on in your particular organisation, guiding everything consistency, and then having a mindset set around that, which can be objective and true, and then getting the right skills in the right places, and then failing, a lot as we have, learning and adapting. So first, visibility. And as the saying goes in security, you can't defend what you don't know. So you've got to understand the complete landscape of what you're doing from the start. So situational awareness, like flying, is absolutely critical to make sure that things are acted upon correctly. In the early phase of any project, there may be no design. So we get the business talking to us in use cases. As I want to, so that I can. For example, as a customer, I want to receive marketing information so that I can receive the latest deals. Or as an extension to that, as a marketing specialist, I want to see data on of customers who take up these deals so that I can see if they've had the right impact. Straight away, you know from this initial context gathering that the customer data will be involved in that, and there'll probably be some interaction points either through a website or through multiple outbound channels. So get your business talking to you in use cases, and then move on to who, why, what, where, and when. And that helps you to build additional context. Because we found in BT that it's really difficult to get people to talk to us in ways that we can understand, to make sure that we get the true security impact of what they're doing. We found that massively difficult. And then sometimes you have to ask why 5 times. So the most important question is keep asking why. So on the right there, we can see that actually the original thing that they told us they wanted to do, and the explanation for it wasn't actually the main reason why they wanted to do it. You keep asking why. Children keep asking why. Children by nature do root cause analysis, and so should we in security. Without all of this context, it can be tricky to understand security. And then we move on to what we call the 7 golden impact zones. So we use this for triage, our initial triage of understanding what the business is trying to do. And it's based around those 7 areas that you see there. What suppliers involved? What service will they be providing? How good is their security? Do you need them in the first place? And then secondly, what data for classification will be involved? Will it be personal, sensitive corporate data according to your own organisations? And then how will that data be processed? So who will have control of it, and what will the impact of processing it? And then followed by what software development will be required. So will it be a new app? What needs to be developed in order to get this thing working? And then what infrastructure will be used? So will it be your own infrastructure, something hosted in the cloud, or will it be a hybrid of the both? And then what integration will be required? What needs to be connected to what? And then finally, what are your regulatory impacts? So UK GDPR, PCI, or for BT, it's like the Telecom Security Act is relevant to us as well. So then you take all of these pieces of context and then you triage them against a high, medium or low impact. And if, like us, you have lots of security people, and lots of things that the business is doing, you can't look at everything. So at some point you have to decide what's the most important thing you're going to do. And what we do is we take all of this context and then triage it, and then that enables us to focus the limited resource we have onto the things that can harm the business the most.
Dean.
Yes.
Hi, it's Steve Sands here. Sorry to interrupt you in your flow. We're getting some comments coming through about some background noise in the room that's making it a bit difficult for some of our remote attendees to hear what you're saying. I wonder if everyone could maybe just not open and close bags. And the mics in the room are incredibly sensitive, and they're picking up all sorts of things, papers and stuff, and it's just making it a little bit awkward. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So then you take all of that context, triage it, it will help you to understand what your priorities should be. So use all the context to help you understand where your focus needs to be. And at that point, that's when you do your threat modelling. So it's important to understand which threats are specific to your organisation. Consider the worst case scenarios, and then let the threat assessment lead you to risk. So we are a threat-led, risk-based security consultancy. We don't talk about risk until we absolutely have to talk about risk. Because if you get into a discussion with any business about risk from the outset, they tend to switch off, is what we've learned. But bottom line with all of this is you have to know what's going on and you have to hunt for it. This is the only way that we found, through a lot of adaptation, through a lot of tried and tested learning, that we actually find out what BT is doing. And there's a little danger statement at the bottom there. So the worst decisions we make are those we make without context. And next, guidance. So everything needs to be consistently driven to get consistent outcomes. So we've already talked about triage. We triage absolutely everything. We've talked about that we are a threat-led security consultancy, and having threat modelling is really important to understand what your risks are going to be ultimately. Beyond that, you want your controls to mitigate those threats and any risks. So we use design patterns. Design patterns are extension to user stories. So design patterns are things like, I want to transfer data to a third party. I want to expose an API to an end customer. I want to set up logging and monitoring on a server. And these patterns help the business to understand and solve security problems so they can feel empowered to do it for themselves, and that we then have to intervene less. We then take a less bespoke approach to everything that we do. The aim here is to create as many patterns as possible. Disney were creating patterns 80 years ago in animation to stop them having to reanimate things across multiple films. And it's really important for security to understand that actually, even at BT, we do very little which is purely greenfield. But actually, most of what BT does is a repeat of what they've done before, just in a slightly different context. So helping to understand what patterns you can apply can help to reduce the burden and the workload of the security service that you may be providing. Anything that you can't address with a pattern, that's when you manage your exceptions. But even then, you say to yourself, well, could it have been a pattern? And if the pattern doesn't exist, go back and create the pattern. And then out of exceptions is when you start talking about risk. So remember, threat-led, risk-based. And only at that point, when we can't manage our exceptions, do we then talk to the business about risk. So like I said earlier, we try to avoid the discussion of risk as much as possible. And then we send that back into our guidance, uplifting all of our guidance. And the idea is this takes a self-learning, self-healing approach where you go through the process multiple times and you build up your consultancy to a point where guidance becomes the norm rather than the exception. And you end up doing less and less bespoke stuff. And then mindset. So security must lead with an objective mindset. So we have to think about the problems we face and how they will have impact to security. Most of you have heard of the phrase shared responsibility. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean to us? Well, first, are the right people taking responsibility? Who makes decisions on risk when they need to be made? Because if you don't have that in the start, how do you expect to solve it later on when it becomes a problem? So who's sponsoring the change? Who will be ultimately responsible for any risks that you end up taking? Then, what are we working on? So we'd already talked about visibility and understanding the context of what we're doing. Do we have a clear and full understanding of what needs to be addressed? Then, what can go wrong? Again, the understanding of the threats we face and determining the worst case scenarios. Followed by, what are we going to do about it? So what controls do we need to mitigate those threats? How will we test those controls? What do we expect then to recall? Then, how do we know if we're going to do a good job? So then that's about penetration testing, testing controls, user acceptance testing, whatever it is required to give you confidence that your controls are working. And then finally, are we making brave decisions? So how do we make decisions on anything that's left? How are we successfully mitigated all the things that we need to mitigate to be confident and comfortable to proceed? Can we be brave enough to say this is or isn't good enough? So this thought process is what all security professionals follow in our consultancy. But it should be for everyone in the business that has an impact on security. Designers, developers, architects should all talk the security mindset, because that's how you make them better at security. Because ultimately, when the pressure is on, it takes a robust mindset to stop poor decisions from being made. Next, skills. So getting the right skills in the right places. So the object of our skill strategy is multifaceted. So great minds do not think alike. And having everyone thinking the same way actually constrains ideas and can actually harm security. So skills need to draw power from, firstly, federation. So security must not operate in a bubble as an ivory tower. The goal of every security professional, in my view, should be to make everyone else better at security. Yes, my job is to do myself out of a job. That's what every security professional needs to be thinking about, the way that they deliver security. So your designers, developers, architects must be coached and mentored over time so they can improve their security skills and become an effective first line of defence for you. Help them to understand security concerns, build empathy for them, and then they will gain additional skills in the long term as well. And everyone's a winner. Next, embrace cognitive diversity. So build your security teams from diverse cultures, backgrounds, and experience. The problems you will face need lateral and critical thinking from people who do not see the world in the same way. This is important to federation too, because the more diverse thinkers that you have, the greater perspective and strength you'll gain. Then, build knowledge everyone can use. So skills need a foundation of knowledge. This is very simply write stuff down and don't reinvent the wheel. So design patterns, assessment methodologies, process guidance, white papers from the learnings of what you've done, escalation guidance, write it all down in a wiki so anyone can use it, not just security people. It has to be written down in a usable way. I can't emphasize enough the importance of doing this and what benefits has shown to us enabling to make this stuff available to the wider business. And then finally, security roles and responsibilities. So everyone in your organisation is responsibility for security. It must be embedded culturally and driven from the top all the way down through your organisation. Ideally, technical roles need technical responsibilities and their performance measured. Senior leadership and executives need to understand their accountabilities. This cannot just remain with security. Having a robust escalation process where the right people take the right decisions is essential to prevent critical failures occurring. And just a reminder of the wisdom down there. And then finally, learning and adapting. So the first and probably the most important aspect of what we do is psychological safety. This is about building up a safe environment that's inclusive, safe to learn, where everyone can contribute and where failure is embraced as a learning opportunity. It can be very difficult to talk to a business about risk in a non-psychologically safe environment. So this is fundamental to making sure that the whole organisation has the opportunity to learn and adapt. And then you have to embrace that failure. So it's accepted to improve things over time. Some things will have to fail. Now, I'm not talking about major breaches or anything like that, but if things do fail, you have to get curious, don't get mad. Build safety nets into your people, process and technology to prevent big failures from happening. Failure plus learning equals adapting. So failing is a necessary part of achieving a better security practice. There's no escaping it. Next, feedback loops. So feedback is essential to understand the flaws in people, process and technology. Ensure that error mechanisms for each. Your security people need workable processes and your business needs the same as well. If you're thinking about KPIs and OKRs, how do you measure security? Well, for us, it's about making sure that we're easy to deal with. Yeah? The effectiveness of your controls is another. But also, how well the business meets its obligations. These are the things for us that we should be measuring. It is, after all, a shared responsibility. It doesn't just sit with security. Security incidents must be used as a learning opportunity as part of feedback loops as well. Pre and post-mortems. So this is separate to threat assessment, but if you've got a big piece of work coming up, like a big transformation or something like that, imagine it's already blown up in your face. What does that look like? What's the worst possible security outcome that you can envisage for something that's already failed? So you have to examine that from every angle and viewpoint, and then be proactive about how you're going to address that before you get into the work. If something has already failed, do a post-mortem on it. So some people call this a post-incident review. You know, if something operationally has failed, it's really important to get the learning from that, so you can make sure that your security adapts and gets better as a consequence of it. And then there's objectivity. So I think we all know there's dozens and dozens of biases. Yeah. The only reliable anchor for security is facts, pure and simple. And they can be distorted by personal and political beliefs. You can't learn if you don't have the facts. We must be aware of narrative fallacies, so that propensity to create excuses for things we see in hindsight, where we don't have a full and adequate explanation for something. And then marginal gains. So this is about having the intellectual honesty to see where you're going wrong, and then doing something about it. If you aim for small incremental improvements over time, they'll have a massive impact. It doesn't matter how small that improvement is, just keep adding them and making them, and they'll all add up. And then finally, you've got to keep innovating. So it's easy to say in an organisation, if it has been done away, it should always be done that way. Not for us. We've always kept innovating in what we do. So an example of that is we have 23 consultants in the team. We now have them operating in squads. There's no lone wolves, and that gives them a safety net to learn. Yeah? So because having people working in isolation means you move away from consistency, because people will tend to make decisions based upon their own personal viewpoint. So working in squads has helped us massively to make sure we stay consistent with the business and give them that good advice. And that is a summary of our Secure by Design framework. So get visibility of the landscape, so you've got to know what's going on. Consistently drive everything, make sure that you apply the same guidance principles to everything you do. The mindset is critically important. And then getting the right skills in the right places. So security skills aren't just for security people. And then fail a lot, learn and adapt. And Secure by Design is knowledge, skill and luck. And luck is preparation and opportunity. And luck is, after all, what you make it. Thank you. I'll take some questions, but as in every presentation these days, you've got to talk about AI. So we created a little song using AI. You might want to listen to this later rather than now. I think it's fair to say we're fairly proud of this, right? And it describes in words, it sounds a lot like Taylor Swift. What's Secure by Design? And it was created using ChatGPT. No. And Sonos actually created the soundtrack track itself. My kids love playing with this, okay? But listen to it later. But in the meantime, I'll go back to questions.
Okay, so one of the issues I've faced when I've gone to work with different clients and encountering the local IT security officer is this notion that some is security through inconvenience. Okay, so everything's got to be password protected, everything's going to have multi-factor authentication because, you know, the North Koreans, the Iranians are out to hack up who you are. So the question I've got is, where did they fail? Where did they go wrong in that mentality? Was it failure to understand the context?
Partly, yeah, but I'm going to let Ish cover some of that in the next session because he has a great explanation around getting the right controls in which are actually suited to the thing that you're trying to do and not over-engineering stuff. So yeah. Right. If you let Ish come to you, I'm sure he'll cover some of that, right?
Yeah, if you've got a follow-up question, you can ask the same question.
Any other questions?
Hi, Dean. Steve here again. We did have a question from Michael. I think I've answered it actually, but I'd be grateful if you can validate my answer. So Michael was asking, is the talk about secure by design methodology that's been developed by the Ministry of Defence Digital Cyber Resilience Programme, and is now mandated for MOD systems that handle classified information and replaces traditional security accreditation? Or is this something else that's also called secure by design? I suspect it's not the version that's run by HMG these days. My answer was, hi, Michael, I think this will be around private sector best practice rather than HMG version. However, I also mentioned that we have another event happening, I think, on the 24th of September, and we will have an HMG speaker dealing specifically with the HMG secure by design process at that session. But I wondered if you wanted to add anything else to it at all.
Yeah, so secure by design can mean different things to different people. This is what it means to us in terms of our implementation within BT. It's very much focused around the people and process, as I said, and driving that consistency, but it is not the same as HMG's definition of secure by design.
Perfect.
It's evolved from that.
I don't think there's any other questions on the chat at the moment, other than just a few comments again about background noise in the room. But I think that's just a function of the sensitivity of the mics in that room. Dean, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
The lady really wanted to play that soundtrack.
I'll get it off somebody else later, thank you.
Do you want to take the floor now?
Yeah. Okay, that's
Sharing your screen.
I remember.
Still. Oh yes, to come through now.
Yep. All right, cool. I'm Ish. I work to Dean. I'm one of the principal consultants at BT. So I cover majority of our cloud environments. And then, yes, as I think as Rob kind of covered in some of the background, the majority of our assurance processes across the organisation. I tie into some of our major risk leads, some of our directors that cover our public cloud environment, as well as some of our development tools as well, things like Git and stuff like that. So I'm going to be covering designing offensively, which should hopefully address the earlier question of how we go away and contextualize what we ask the business to go away and do in terms of control. So you mentioned multi-factor authentication. I find that generally, especially within BT, we too are also guilty of just like throwing controls at something and then crossing our fingers and hoping it works. So there's a bit of a science behind it. So I'll hopefully kind of delve into what that looks like and hopefully give you guys some like food for thought. I've tried to abstract it out a little bit. So I think there's probably going to be a variety of different technologies in the room and probably on the Zoom meeting. So yeah, I'm going to start off though with a thing that I am pretty well known for, which is Formula One and racing sims. So I like the physics and the geekiness of motorsport. I had a motorbike, crashed it, smashed my wrist, put a plate in, so, and I'd still get another motorbike. So my love for like the motorsport and how they go away and address real risk, which is people's lives at the end of the day. and how they go in, protect their assets, their drivers and their machinery, and their R&D, their research and development and all of that. They have a very similar approach to what we have within the technology industry. They fundamentally have an asset or a set of assets, and they're trying to protect them and outperform people within their own paddocks. So there's a bit of an introduction, which is basically in cybersecurity, anticipating threats before they materialize is essentially fundamental to securing solutions. So you shouldn't always having to be playing catch up with the industry, because a new exploit is about, you should be able to have some level of confidence that your security posture is indeed suitable for an ever-changing geopolitical environment, against a variety of different threat actors, no matter where they sit and no matter what their motivations are. Naturally, with threat actors, you'll have different finances thrown at them, so their capabilities will naturally differ, but ultimately, you're trying to secure your systems irrespective of whoever's going after them. So we're going to start with a case study, and I am going to put a little warning out here. There is an accident that I am going to show you in Formula One, but there is a moral behind the story, and there is something to go away and take away. So yeah, we'll go away and cover that. So Formula One. Formula One is known for their innovation. They build cars to go away and race around tracks. They measure how well their cars are performing in terms of competitiveness, and they learn from that and go away and develop new parts for their cars to get them even faster. The organization that kind of oversees it all is the FIA, and they will build out standards for the car manufacturers to go away and build against, irrespective of whether you're rallying around Monte Carlo or you're going around an F1 circuit. There is still a standard that is expected to be met, and teams are free to innovate to meet that particular standard. As I said earlier, the assets are all very well defined. So you have a car that's worth millions of quid. You have a driver whose life is ultimately priceless. They've still got families to kind of go back to. Their lives are essentially in their team's hands. And as a result of that, everything has to be understood. So how the car is going to perform going into a corner, all the way through to how much downforce is there to kind of increase the amount of speed. Everything is kind of known to the absolute detail, including things like tire pressures and tire temperatures. There is so much science within that field that barely anything escapes essentially the pit wall, who are looking at a whole bunch of like figures and stuff on their screen. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to balance risk versus reward in real time. So they are essentially risking how fast or how reliable their engines are before they go kaput against the value that they can get towards the end of a season or at the end of a race in terms of prize money. And they're trying to balance that over the course of an entire season without ultimately breaking the bank. There is at times, however, even within this industry, a reluctance to change. So the clip that I'm going to go away and show you will show that the reluctance to change at times, even though teams or organizations might not necessarily want to embrace change, ultimately, if you can contextualize and present it in the correct way, eventually the dividends will pay off when the worst happens. So in 2021, there was a massive accident, I think it was in Saudi Arabia, where a car went through a barrier at nearly 119 miles an hour, where the driver had experienced 67 times their body weight in force exerted against their body. It was the first time in ages since a car had caught fire or a chassis had completely disintegrated. So the top right picture is basically the car in half, but the backside of the car. And the driver only came out with minor burns and walked to the safety car. So imagine you've had 67 times your force, and the only thing that you can rely upon in that moment is your team securing the chassis so you can get up and walk home to your family. So I will play this next clip, if it plays. Yes.
So somehow they're getting through, but Bottas then obviously on his back foot. And that's where the scuffle was, look, right in the middle of the pack. And Roman's registering that, look, ahead of power, 4 or 5 cars. And but the retardation of the front of that monocoque must have been instant. It's gone nowhere, has it? Look, it's gone 5 meters down the barriers. So just the retardation alone was enough. Now he's sitting in a ball of flames. There's the 2 guys from the medical car we talked to, Dr. Ian Roberts and Alan van der Merwe.
So Dr. Ian Roberts has gone obviously straight to the incident and drags Roman away. Alan van der Merwe with the fire extinguisher. He got from the boot of the Mercedes estate.
So he's already, obviously Roman's already out of the car at that point.
Yeah.
So he's survived the retardation, the impact, and the fire.
This is where Grosjean cuts across.
Now, as Roman was having, there were 5 or 6 cars, sort of scuffling around ahead of him.
So I will leave that one there, but you kind of get the gist. So you have a driver going at full pelt, a whole bunch of cars around him, and he has to be able to trust his drivers around him, and they're competitive people. And he has assumed that the risk of him pulling out to the right will pay dividends for him on the next corner coming up. And the team naturally will go away and encourage that level of competitiveness. However, there was things that saved him along the way that were conscious decisions by his team and by the organisation that kind of develops the standards and everything else that kind of keeps drivers and cars safe. So if we were to go away and abstract it, the threats to the driver, if you were to go away and take the driver in this example, is essentially a high-speed crash, such as that one, going through any kind of sheet of metal at 119 miles an hour is generally something that you wouldn't really want to go away and do. Mechanical failures, so imagine a tyre pops and the same thing happens. That's still a level of threat to your asset, being the driver if you are the team. Physical strain on the driver, so imagine you've got, that was 67 times the body weight of the driver. Imagine you're going through a corner at 120 and you're shifting all the way to the side and you've got to keep your neck straight, so there's still physical strain on the driver. You've got the mental fatigue, because you're having to calculate so many things. You're like a human processor at this point. You're trying to just get yourself through a race, almost relying on muscle memory half the time. Debris on track, so imagine there's something on the track and it hits your tyre and you go off, or it bounces up and hits you in the head. Like again, at that type of speed, it's like no mean feat. Weather conditions, imagine it's rainy and you have to slam your brakes on at 120 miles an hour. You're relying on your team to give you a good set of rubber to keep you stuck to the ground. So if we go away and take another level down from here, we know that injury is obviously something that is going to be a threat to your asset. We know we can take that level of abstraction and say a tyre failure, a fuel leak, and electronic failure could also pose as a threat to your asset, being your car as well as your driver at this point. Physical strain, dehydration, you're losing litres of water. Imagine you're running at like 40, 50 degree heat inside a cockpit with nowhere else to move and you're kind of like squeezed in as though you're on the tube in London. Human error, debris damage, as well as things like rain, as I was saying. And then you also have, on top of this complexity, operational contributors for it. So imagine a team gets fined and they can't go away and deliver the best car and it's susceptible to like failures. Imagine you have operational failures where people do not follow a particular process, and that ultimately poses as a threat to the organisation or to the car or to the driver. And things like team dynamics, like naturally people will go away and quarrel amongst themselves. You can't have that within a high pressure environment because you need to be able to make the right decision at the right time. However, there are controls that each one of these car manufacturers and racing bodies implement. So they assess their suppliers. So if you're going to go away and have fireproof clothing, you have to be really, really sure that that fireproof clothing in that particular instance is not going to go away and stick to the skin of your driver. So they kind of get, all of their skin comes off with their, when you go away and take everything off. You need to be sure that it's going to give them some level of protection. The halo protection is basically like a little thing that sits on top of the cockpit, which basically saved this driver's life. All of the teams had said that it looked ugly and it imposed, or it made it difficult to kind of see around it because you've got like a little pillar. But that's essentially what saved that driver's life at that particular point. You've obviously got a robust chassis, obviously disintegrated, as you saw. So this is where they went away and learned off the back of it. So for a best part of 2-3 years, it had never happened. You're talking since like the 1980s. You'd never had a chassis split in two like that. So they had to go away and revisit whatever they had previously spec'd out, because it ultimately failed, and they had to go away and learn from it to go away and drive innovation and drive proof. Driver training, the only reason why that driver came out is because those drivers are strenuously tested to get out of a car if it was in flames or even if it was upside down, as standard set by the racing bodies. Fault loggings as well, you need to be able to detect a fault if a tyre pressure is going off. You need to be able to react, so that's another control that they go away and put in. Runoff areas is another one. So there's a reason why that barrier wasn't right on the fence of or side of the racetrack, because you want to at least have a driver be able to brake, to at least kill or scrub off some of that speed before an impact happens. You've got crash barriers, safety checks, and marshals. So you saw them coming out with their fire extinguishers. They're there and everything is ready and everything is prepared for should the worst happen. In this particular case, so that a driver can walk away with essentially his life. He is an asset. And at the end of the day, life is the most precious asset that we have. So that continuous learning and continuous development ultimately follows exactly the same process as we would do within cybersecurity, albeit we take it on a much geekier basis, which we'll go into next. So, secure by design, as Dean previously said, you can't defend what you don't know. So contextualization is fundamentally key. And it's something that I know that I've been driving within our own teams for the past 2.5 years. So I've been working for Dean, I think this October is going to be my 5th year. So over the last 2.5 years, this approach to how do we go away and contextualize risk, how do we understand threat, and how do we build offensively to be able to meet an attacker, not just throw a whole bunch of controls and pray that it works, and just measure it through some like funky log somewhere and say, oh, something bad's happened because the logger's gone away and told us. When we have to go away and begin to understand why that happened, we should be able to factor that into the way that we go away and design our systems and architect our systems. So some key concepts. The first one is context. So the only real question is why. So why is the business looking to do what it wants to go away and do? So if you know that, let's say, a business wants to create a new login portal so customers can go away and self-serve, you automatically know straight away what types of activities you would expect that customer to be able to go away and do. So you know they're going to have a login page in front of them. You might have some analytics off the back of it. When they go away and log in, they might want to be able to view their bills, change their payments, update their contact preference number. So you begin to be able to contextualize what the business is looking to go away and do, irrespective of the technology. The technology is slightly irrelevant. So whether it's AWS, whether it's like, I don't know, a funky Microsoft environment, or it's something bespoke that's been built, you fundamentally don't care at this stage, because all you want to know is why, and begin to build a picture of what it is the business is trying to do. So if I was to turn around and say to you, I'm going to go away and build an extension, a rear extension, you will automatically know what I'm talking about. You don't care about the bricks or what color the mortar is going to be or how many windows that are going to be there. Those aren't the first thing that comes to your mind. It will be how big is that extension going to be, for fundamentally how much more space am I going to go away and get. Why is technology any different? So that contextualization is the first step in being able to actually understand your threats. Abstraction, we kind of covered it. Detail will only confuse you at this stage. You don't care whether it's like a Linux box with like some random kernel on it at this stage. You can go into that level of detail afterwards. But the first step again is the context. Because ultimately systems only orchestrate processes, and you should be able to follow the data through every service that data flows through, whether it's a Lambda function, whether it goes into an S3 bucket and then it goes over onto like a GCS bucket, then it comes to on-prem and somebody needs to go away and log into the server. By you following that data, you'll automatically pick up on the types of technologies that are going to be involved or will become involved later on down the line. And then you analyze at that point. So you've kind of got a good picture in terms of like what's going on, and you want to understand what are the unhappy paths for us within security at this stage. So the commercial aspects of how much revenue this new journey is going to think and how much it's going to cost is slightly like meh. At this point, you want to understand who is going to cause you to be unhappy. What are they going to go away and do? Where are they most likely going to manifest that? And how are they most likely going to do it at that point? So if you've got a front end, you will know roughly where you would expect a certain threat to manifest itself. At that point, you're kind of working out roughly who's going to be going after it. Then you can entertain, oh, I've got like state actors, I've got a script kiddie, I've got a hacktivist that might go after it. Okay, what happens if this happens? And you can begin to scenario out the most probable causes of a threat manifesting itself and actually posing a risk or an incident to an organization. And then as kind of going back onto Dean's point, the frameworks essentially are flexible at this stage, because essentially what you could do, if you've previously seen something similar, is define a pattern as that framework and see how well it fits into the context being presented to you. And at that point, you apply your features to meet the adversary, because you know roughly, even if you don't know who, you would know where they will go and how they are most likely going to cause you an issue. And at that point, you evaluate and take a step back and give yourself a second chance. Some systems are very, very large, some systems are very, very niche, and some systems are actually very, very bespoke, especially if you're dealing within, especially if you're working within legacy environments. So being able to go away and give yourself a second chance allows you to either go away and peer review with somebody within your wider security team. You can go out to your solution architects, your IT teams, your network guys, and be able to say, is my presumption of how this works in reality correct? And is there anything else that I need to be aware of? And you might go through this loop a few times, but essentially at that point you're learning, and that is your point of what could I have gone away and done differently. So is there something that I missed, or the wider team had missed? Is this a knowledge gap within the team? Is this a failing of governance within the wider organization? Essentially, what is it? So there are two pillars of design that I feel are key. So one is clarity and one is control. I'm not going to go through all of this and like the next slide, but essentially clarity, again, you're trying to understand why the business is looking to do what it's looking to go away and do. Are you going to be dealing with legacy environments or like newer technology? And probably the two main points on here are these two: functionality and users. So how will data be processed, and what users and identities are going to be working with the solution? So are you working on a machine-to-machine basis? Are you expecting users to go away and interact, and then it goes onto a machine-to-machine basis? How are you going to be able to define what should be authorized to access what, and what scopes are you going to go away and implement? And then you've got a few things around internal and external identity. So you obviously got management, support, API, service accounts. You've got external people who might be within your supply chain or your customers. There's a variety of people that kind of fit within there. And this next one is around domain. So again, I won't go through all of these, but I'll go through the top section. So similar to the F1 analogy, I have distilled these following domains of security in terms of control. So one being identity and access management, one being segregation, and this is how we go and segregate our environments and actually understand why we're segregating in the first place. Application. So do we understand the application's infrastructure, any gateways, containers versus VMs? Do we understand how the software is going to be developed, what pipelines it's going to go through, how are we going to go away and test it, etc., etc. Availability, cryptography, how we manage our vulnerabilities, and then how our supply chains interact with our technology stacks. So the next one is similar to Dean. ChatGPT is an amazing thing. Pinnacle Financial Solutions was invented by OpenAI. So we have people that invest their money into high return and low risk asset portfolios is essentially what this fictitious company kind of covers. What we're going to run through is kind of like a dummy of how we would generally, or how I would expect like us to go away and define what controls are applicable and why they are applicable. So some random bit of architecture, again, courtesy of our wonderful friends in AI. So you've got a web client, it speaks over to an Amazon environment. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So you've got Cognito for like your identity, you've got some storage stuff, BCS, etc., etc. I'm not going to go through all of these. I've just picked out a few, and you can kind of like get the gist. The point of this exercise is we'll go through statements within how we address threat. So first one being the web client. So a user might want to inject SQL, rightly or wrongly. They might want to cross-site script. They might want to execute code remotely. And they might even want to be able to hide their activities and actions. So as an organization, we should validate and constrain user input. And we can begin to build up these controls as we kind of like work through, so we can authorize all calls for information. So you have to be able to prove your identity, number one, but you need to also be able to, be authorized to access the back-end environments in order to basically put your information in or retrieve information out. And then you can, let's say somebody wants to go away and hide their activities and actions, we can go away and create logs to detect anomalous behavior. If it's a web client, we know that we can go away and security scan and test the application either through the application's pipeline or through a more invasive like pen test. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're not saying we're just going to throw these controls on and hope it works. We're going to go away and characterize what a user, malicious or not, it could even be inadvertent. Yeah, I don't know. So if you've got any grads on, you might have a grad come in and accidentally do something and it pulls the whole site down. So you can go away and think, what are the things that are going to go away and cause us an issue as a either malicious or accidental type of activity, which is the reason why these statements are a user wants to inject SQL. I don't think anybody really do that unintentionally, but yeah, you kind of get the gist. Amazon Cognito, same thing. So we'll go away and take the next service on there. So we'll say, okay, a user wants to gain access to insecure accounts, or they want to create spam or shell accounts within it, or even intercept the authentication, or present a valid authentication token to a service endpoint. So essentially like a replay attack. So we should introduce password complexity at that stage, things like multi-factor authentication. So we're actually addressing a concern. And implement verification checks if somebody is creating spam or like shell accounts. So we can put in captcha, SMS or email verification. If somebody wants to go away and intercept, we know that we can implement things like HTTPS between all the authentication endpoints. And we can even implement things like token expiration. So the time between you first presenting your authentication credentials and the time the token expires, you can say, okay, it's 30 minutes between every authentication attempt, or like between inactivity on the account. Similar was that with Amazon S3. We can say a user wants to gain access to sensitive informations, or they want to probe the network or platform edge. So there are some researchers out there that actually go away and start probing around to see which types of S3 buckets are like set to public. You might have somebody innocent like that just doing security research, or they want to actually change data stored because they know that your logs are going into a certain bucket that's been incorrectly configured. So again, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. You can implement AWS IAM user policies and essentially, sorry about the third bullet point on there, don't know what happened. But yeah, you can define IAM roles for users. You can even restrict or segregate the S3 bucket from the wider world, so you can create a VPC endpoint. You can configure the VPC endpoint policies. You can deny or block access directly on the S3 bucket if you wanted to. And let's say you've got some logs going over, you can implement like worm via the object lock, which is write once, read many type stuff. So you can only you can write all of your logs and then be assured that nobody's tampering around with them. Same for the API gateway that kind of like sits in there. So you can a user wants to anonymously call a microservice, so they don't want to authenticate, they don't want to authorize themselves. So you can go in and enforce authenticated calls. You can say you need to mutually authenticate between the gateway and the destination service. Deploy things like web application firewalls, which in itself will have its own configuration assigned to it. So what types of user does not want to be blocked by web application firewall, what would that actually look like in terms of configuration? You might want to throttle or rate the limit request to stop yourselves being DDoSed. And you can actually mediate responses on a gateway to act as a DLP solution. So let's say you want to exfiltrate sensitive data. If you're going to go away and call a end service and the API only, as part of this JSON, only allows you to pull back, I don't know, first name, last name, and date of birth, but you have a feeling that telephone number might be within there, you can configure that on your gateway and basically stop anything like telephone number or additional bits being added onto it as like a belt and braces approach. Or you can implement OAuth scope-based access control again to authorize the activities. Amazon ECS, I think, is the last one, yeah. So let's say a user wants to change configuration files or exploit the container images. Again, you can do simple things like setting granular access rules and disabling root, enforcing strong authentication in order to be able to interact with the ECS service. And you can begin to harden like your network interfaces, your ports protocols, and then design and implement your logging and response rules as well. So again, when you're kind of mapping out these threats, you know the behavior that you are expecting, and everything else is an exception to the norm. So you can again begin to actually focus your logging around the things that you're not expecting to see as things to go away and like respond to, and then everything else you can kind of like pick up like as and when. But again, you have visibility similar to an F1 team where they have like whether the tire pressure goes down. You should be able to actually have logs that make sense to you and actually give you some insight as to how your system architectures are kind of behaving. At the end of all of this, you essentially have an executive summary. So we know that we had a total of 23 threats. We had a total control count of 28, and we can begin to break them down. So Amazon Cognito, you had 4 threats to that. You had 6 controls that you went away and kind of like applied to it. Why can't that be a pattern? So you'd say, I want to go away and use Amazon Cognito. This is the threat profile against it. These are how the controls address that threat profile. Or you might decide to abstract it even further and say, I don't care about Cognito. I just want to have a threat with a series of controls badged against it that people should be able to go away and interact with, look up and say, oh, if I have this threat, these are the types of things that I would need to go away and implement. The lack of control becomes a conversation around risk at this point. So you've gone away and you've understood what threats exist. You need to go away and implement a control, but for whatever reason you can't. At that point, that particular threat poses a risk to the organization explicitly within the solution. And that can happen for 3 reasons. So one is product launch. So let's say your organization wants to go away and deliver a new product, irrespective of what it is. In this particular case, we were talking about like a login portal, but you could be talking about, let's say, a new network product or a new IoT device. It doesn't really make a difference. The product launch would be the business making a choice as to whether they want to realize the revenue or commercialize their new product faster than they can secure it entirely. So they may well turn around and say, actually, we know that we've got 5 or 6 additional controls that we need to go away and implement, but we are comfortable that we've covered A, B, and C before we go ahead, and we will defer the implementation of those controls until a later date because we feel comfortable making that decision. And this is where the communication between security teams and risk leads and corporate governance teams is really key, because you need to be able to contextualize something that they might not necessarily know how to contextualize to allow them to make a better informed decision. Because ultimately, generally speaking, security do not cough up the money. So organizations are entitled to take risk, and our job within like our consultancy team is to allow them to make an informed choice. Another one could be cost of time, cost of or time to implementation. So it could be cost prohibitive to go away and implement something. And based on the context, so let's say you can only access it internally, it's not externally facing, they may well turn around and say, yeah, that's fine. That's not a problem. Even though somebody could maybe laterally move onto the box, they'll say, we'll focus our controls elsewhere and we can live with this particular threat within this particular context, and we can go away and like address that risk. And the last one is skill set of workforce. And this does not mean that people in organizations are incompetent. The way that I like to sum this up is, let's say you've got an organization full of, let's say you've got 100 Java developers and you've got 1 Python developer, and you're expecting somebody to go away and secure a Python application. He might have a lot of work on him, and you need to go away and recruit people that actually understand how to go away and code in Python and to be able to do that proficiently. So you have a gap in your workforce that you need to go away and bridge. And until that happens, you are always going to have a backlog. And that in itself, your people, can also pose you a risk in this particular context. Not in terms of them doing something malicious, but in terms of how much you can go away and stretch them. And I think I've just finished right on time. I think. So,
okay. Well, thanks for that. We can have more questions, but actually, if you both go together, you can have questions between Secure by Design and...
yeah, sure. That tumbleweed.
That was a lot of info.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So often the resistance to security comes from within the business, being perhaps afraid to engage with the specialists or unable to afford the time of the specialists. Have you gone about making sure that you are actually included? Is there a trick in your business model? Are you free to use at the point of engagement?
So no one pays for our services. So ultimately, all the BT Group pays for security to exist. Now, that may not be practical in every business environment, but when we first started off, it was actually a barrier. Someone had to pay for our time. We found that the only way to solve that problem was to remove it completely.
I'll probably add on to that. I find, like, especially when I joined, so I was a data consultant before I moved into Dean's team, and we used when GDPR came out after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we had essentially remodeled the majority of our consumer, or like our residential customer base, and did quite a fair bit within that space. And I think the rule's the same. Like whenever you're doing like either consultancy or like assurance work, I found personally you cannot react emotionally to something atrocious happening within the organization. It's almost like my daughter does something that she shouldn't have done. If my reaction is going to be something like, why the hell did you do that? You're just never really going to get anywhere. So there is an element of kind of like give and take and knowing when to go away and fight your battles. Again, it comes down to understanding the context of the problem. So like if I was to turn around and say that, okay, there's an organization that doesn't encrypt any of their databases, like you just cannot react like, oh, what the hell, you haven't gone away and encrypted anything. You have to be able to contextualize it and take that time to go away and understand. And ultimately, the person who's actually been tasked to do the work isn't actually the person with the purse strings. They're just some guy or girl or woman trying to get through something, trying to get paid at the end of the month. I think if you kind of look at it through that lens, you find that you can, number one, teach people as you kind of go, but that friction that you typically find between security and developers and designers.
It's worth talking about how it's developed from sort of the EU security passport to the BT security passport, then on to secure by design.
Yeah, so so we had lots of consultants. So I think the team got up to 35 strong at one point. The way that we actually dealt with maintaining that type of resource pool was just to get better at guidance. You have to write stuff down. You have to help a business to understand security. Because ultimately, otherwise you're just going to be looking at everything in a bespoke way. And it goes back to my talk about the knowledge base aspects of it. That we spent a lot of our time actually taking a step back and writing things down, design patterns, guidance, making sure people have access to that. And then actually coaching the business within the technical areas to understand security. So we have a program called Guide, Trust, Verify. So our goal ultimately is to federate as much of security, first line, back into the business. And the way we do that is to train the business to do security for itself. And that ultimately does everyone out of a job. But it's the only way that you maintain it in a scalable way for the future. And that's a long period takes a long time to do that. We've been on this journey for 5 years now, and it's going to take more years to get it done. But nobody wants to pay excess amounts of money for security forever. Security has to become better. Do less with more. That's the kind of the expectation, right? That's the model we're kind of working to.
Yeah, I think I'd also add on to that. The business, I find, especially kind of like within BT and other friends that are kind of like within other organisations, businesses or people within organisations don't like being told what to do. I don't think anybody really likes or enjoys being told what to do. I think especially kind of like some of the evolution within consultancy, as kind of like Rob has kind of like alluded to, is whenever we get to kind of like a risk discussion, there has to be the awareness that the business ultimately has to make the discussion, and our due diligence as security consultants or people that go away and assure the organisation that security is being met or a good security posture is being met, is recognising that whilst they have the responsibility to go in, either take on or come to some form of risk decision, our responsibility and our due diligence is being able to give them the most objective picture of what's going on. So it's not about necessarily saying this is what you must do and kind of like trying to drive compliance and hit the compliance head over people. It's being able to turn around and say, actually, this here's based upon what I can see, based upon the design that I've seen, based upon all of the conversations. These are the threats that, again, you are exposed to. And our best judgment is this year would be the impact. We believe that to be highly unlikely because of A, B, and C, such as kind of like the controls. This is over to you. And the organisation will make the organisational decisions based upon their own commercial incentives.
Question for Dean, really. You said that you've gone to a little team model, your little squads. I should imagine it smells in great demand as a data scientist. So what do your teams look like? What's the hybrid mix that you do? Because presumably they're not all data scientists.
No. So I'm not a data scientist. So I'm a principal security consultant. I was a data scientist before.
But you have that fundamental data understanding.
Oh, yes.
You can do the touchy. I've seen data scientists and they're like, they love their models. They're very personal to them. So not everyone will get that. And I'm just trying to see, in the mix of the teams, you're not going to send 7 data scientists, are you? So, I mean, is that a conscious decision to mix the skills, to fit? And presumably you've got some business analysis to help you with that as well.
Yeah, so the mix of the team is not just everyone's a cookie cutter security consultant. They've all come from different backgrounds. So we've got people ex-law enforcement, people who've come from a psychology background, people that have been engineers putting equipment into roadsides on BT vans, you know. So we very deliberately built our team from people from very diverse experience and backgrounds. And this is just an example of another component of that. And that gives us massive strength and perspective and enables us to look at problems in different ways. But we have the benefit of being in a very large organisation that...
And if I may, for you personally, obviously the Chinese are in the back of the chief executive officer at Nortel for 10 years. And the security, while I was trying to complain about it, if you were on site in Nortel today and it was 20 years ago, what would you do?
It's such a long time ago. It's very different today, right? So things have moved on massively since those days, and in fact, security wasn't really it didn't really feel like a thing back in the early 2000s. You know, and every year we seem to come across new threats, new technology arises. You know, we're talking about quantum, and that just blows my mind, right? And because it's massive. You know, I was beeping modems back in the early 2000s, and you know, the way the technology moves on is something that we also have to consider, because we constantly have to adapt the way that we look at new technology problems.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dean, it's Steve. Can we take a question from one of our remote attendees? I've got Jermaine standing by to ask a question.
So we've got a gentleman in the room first, very quickly,
right,
Steve,
okay.
if that's okay?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the business makes decisions on the basis of what the security consultant gives, but how does a security consultant avoid the blame when a business follows a decision that they give as an option to the business to take, and what extent or how do you know to what extent the consultancy would take blame for any failure of the business?
So partly it's a shared responsibility, right? So, you know, security doesn't exist in a bubble, it's not an ivory tower. Security consultants are there as guides, primarily, they're there as advisors. They help the business go into problems, these decisions eyes open, with a full context to make a decision, but ultimately risk always sits with the business, it doesn't sit with security. And we work on that basis, right?
Yeah, and if I go in kind of like expanding that, we have within our structure all the way up to kind of like our director and then his boss, so our CISO, an understanding that risk sits within the organisation. Naturally, we manage our own cyber risk and we have initiatives kind of like internally to kind of go away and handle our cyber risk, but ultimately for risks that arise from activity the business themselves are driving, they sit within the business units. Pretty well established roles and responsibilities are kind of like pretty well defined. In terms of, if I kind of take your question a little bit to the extreme, If what you're saying is a consultant misses something and then something happens as a result of that, so we haven't properly contextualized the risk or we've played down something, this is essentially where we go away and learn. And I think from Dean's level down, I remember Dean, when I first joined, said there's a difference between an innocent mistake and a malicious mistake. So if you are intentionally kind of like turning a blind eye to something, the way that we kind of like look through designs, things like glaringly obvious, and something innocent, like people go away and like make mistakes. As you saw with that F1 driver, if he checked his mirror, he would have seen another car behind him and he wouldn't have turned to the right. People do naturally go away and make mistakes. Obviously, the impacts will kind of like be varied, but it was one of the reasons why we implemented like a very squad-based approach. So you're able to go away and peer review and double check and sanity check things before they go out. So imagine you've got like a pool of 20 consultants all doing their own thing, each with their different backgrounds, each looking at things through a different lens based upon either their own personal biases or kind of the things that kind of like floats their own boat. When you kind of consolidate them into a group pool of consultants that can validate their decisions against one another, at least there's a form of like collective responsibility to go away and actually achieve a good security posture within the organisation.
And a safety net as well, which is really important, because we found that it's very easy for consultants to become not afraid, but find difficult to talk to the business if they're working on their own, to have difficult discussions about risk. But if they're working as a squad, then they can sanity check their ideas around risk, make sure they understand it, contextualise it, as Ish says, and the conversation with the business then becomes much easier to have.
So there are times where if something silly is happening, like we do put our foot down and say, hold on, like, no, this is unacceptable, but they're very few and far between. As I said, people come into work to get paid at the end of the month, and they don't come into work to go away and cheese an organisation off. So, yeah, well, in the vast majority of cases.
And we pick our battles.
Yeah. Cool. Steve, you had one on the chat.
Yes, we've got Jermaine on the call at the moment, ready to talk to you.
Hello, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Dean and Ishmael. It was a brilliant presentation. I actually have 3 questions. I will ask one at this point. I wanted to ask you, Dean, in regards to psychological safety of groups and individuals and further the workplace cultural environment, you mentioned diversity in background, skills, and so on in relation to building teams. Is there or are there models that you recommend leaders, managers use when recruiting and shaping their teams?
So we're historically with recruitment, and both Ish and Vicky were with me in the room, we've recruited very much around mindset first. So we don't really focus in much upon the technical aspects of where people have been. We focus on the way they think about security and can they objectively own and take responsibility for their own way of thinking. And that's the primary mechanism we use for recruiting. And that's allowed us to get people in the team who haven't even had a history of security. They've never been in security before. So we're very much focused on mindset when we do recruiting.
Yeah, and if I kind of like add on to that, as an example, we recently recruited somebody with no cybersecurity, not even a technical background at all, law degree, understands law very well. I don't think it will take a genius to work out that law and cybersecurity is a very niche skill set to have. As long as you can kind of, as long as you have the mindset around threat and being able to identify threat, as we do with like when we kind of like walking down the street or walking out the house, like automatically have I locked the door to make sure nobody goes in, because you know that the threat is the burglar coming in. Let me just make sure I've locked the door. Let me just make sure like I've shut all the windows. Threat is something that innately as humans we are very easy to go away and pick up. What we tend to do is jump straight to the geekiness side of technology and forget the very human nature of being able to actually understand like what can go wrong. So somebody that can go in and actually understand like where problems may arise, you can teach them the technology. You can allow people to go away and specialize in whatever technology they want. But ultimately, if you're just chasing somebody to go away and tick a box like, oh yeah, they've got like encryption, they've got like access control lists in place, they've got like a different subnet, and they've gone away and segregated stuff out. The moment you go down to that level, you automatically lose the person that gives you that diversity of thought within a team. So when we're kind of like building teams, and I know I've done a few like recruitment rounds with my dean, fundamentally the main thing is kind of like thought process, how you go away and tackle a problem. Because you can always teach like the security aspects of stuff. Ultimately, if you're to really boil it down, you're either allowing something or you're denying something. It's literally as simple as that. And you just need to work out what you want to allow and what you want to deny. And you understand the technology will allow you to get a bit more nuance with what you're allowing and denying. But ultimately, that there is like cybersecurity for you to go away and distill it down.
Awesome. Thank you both very much. It's very reassuring. I'm currently on a boot camp at the moment, and yeah, this has been really warmly received. Thank you. I do have 2 other questions, but I can see that there's another question in the chat, and there might be some questions in the room. I'm happy for you to come back to me.
I'll leave you unmuted, and we'll come back round to you if we have time, Jermaine. Thank you. Rob, do you want me to take another one from the chat, or do you have another one?
No hands up at the moment, so we can take one from the chat.
Okay, we've got one from Harry here. How would you handle conflicting needs between making sure security is handled well while allowing for an easy user experience? And Harry, if you want to unmute and follow that up with any more detail, then feel free.
So if we just address the conflicting needs side of things, this is exactly why we triage. So if Harry's referring to how we focus in on stuff, as I said in the beginning, we look at thousands of things a year, and we can't do that with a pool of consultants. We can't look at everything. So this is where the triage mechanisms are fundamentally important. And in fact, we could do a whole presentation on the way that we've developed our triage. The top level of it is what you saw, the 7 golden questions, as we normally call them. But there are additional rules below that, how we make sure that we focus in on the things that can actually cause us harm. And that way we take away the confliction between having a massive stuff to do and understanding what needs to actually be addressed from a security point of view. I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that.
So you guys kind of know the NHS. I know we had a few conversations around like the NHS, and I think that predominantly it would be fair to say our triage like approach was actually modelled off like how the NHS triage you in A&E. So if you go in with like a life, like, I don't know, let's say your arm severed off, you're going to be seen a lot sooner than somebody who stubbed their toe. And we kind of take exactly the same approach with how we go away and triage within security. Ultimately, the business has to take responsibility. Like a developer, you cannot, I think we're long gone are the days where you can work in a technology field and you can claim ignorance to security. It should at least be something that people are aware of. They might not know necessarily what to go away and do, but I think that's where we kind of like, when we go away and triage, Vicky's in the room, so she kind of heads up like our triage function. Essentially, we would go away and say, this is the guidance, you need to go away and do A, B, and C. And then we rely on their own technical expertise of working with specific technologies to go away and implement. But yeah, if you come in with something that is like majorly like greenfield or like something that is really, really bespoke that could seriously damage the organization, the chances are we will have a look at it. And that's how we kind of like balance needs of us being successful within our own roles and the business being successful with their own objectives, which is essentially, with every organization, is to be profitable at the end of the day. Like regardless of like however we go away and spin it, every organization, unless you're like not for profit, you're out there to make money.
We could do a session on triage if it interests, right? We need a lot of coffee for it, probably. But if there's real interest, we can do another session on how we approach triage, the modelling of it, how we make decisions. Vicky does a fantastic job for us, managing those thousands of demands a year that we see and keeping us focused on the things that really, really could harm us. And that really is a balancing act.
I saw a presentation last week where there's the potential for 1 million CVEs a week. So, Vicky, ready for triage?
I'm a team, so I'm okay.
Yeah.
In your talk, you touched on the importance of teaching security to people outside of the kind of formal security team as such. What techniques have you used for this that were particularly successful?
So just basically training anyone that's interested, first and foremost. So actually there's a lot of interest in security skills we've found. Finding those pockets of people, we then turn them into security champions, guardians through our Guide, Trust, Verify program of work. And the idea is that over time we build up that resource, that federated resource across the business, and we will actually see a reduction in ourselves as a consequence. But that's an accepted outcome for actually establishing a first line of defence where it needs to be, not in security, but in the business.
Yeah, I think I kind of like add on. So I've done quite a fair bit of training within the organisation, like tech training now. A lot of it is, as I was mentioning earlier, like security is innate to us. You can find analogies left, right and centre for like literally everything from like how APIs work, reverse proxies, forward proxies. You can always put in a human into the loop and have a building of sorts and a parcel, and you can go away and rinse that analogy to death and play it in so many like different ways. So I find as long as you can make security relatable to somebody, you don't need to teach them like the technical shenanigans around it. As long as they understand the concept and the concept is memorable, they can begin to actually understand how to go away and apply said concept when they're working with technology. I remember teaching somebody about why you go away and encrypt a payload and why you go away and encrypt data in transit. So they're like, oh no, like why would I go away and do that? The tunnel is secure. And I remember saying to them that if you were to go away and drive a car from one end of a tunnel to the other, before you start off, your car's exposed, and when you land on the other side, your car's exposed. However, if you were to be wrapped up in like, and if your car was like bulletproof and you could go away and withstand anything, that's your protected payload. Before that, you are relying on users or people not having access to your car from the outside. Otherwise, they can just pull open your door or kind of like do whatever they need to go away and do. So that's why if you do not encrypt your payload, you need to have your access control, you need to be able to segregate to kind of keep that car safe and away from people or away from identities or things that could pose you a harm as an organization, whether it's somebody kicking you out the car and stealing it, or whether it's somebody stealing you with the car. If you're in a fully bulletproof encased car that you can't go away and open the locks, your payload is safe irrespective of whatever happens, unless somebody develops something in quantum and manages to crack how to go away and get the shell off the car.
And then the car will be in two places at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gents, I've got one final question, if you wouldn't mind, from Jermaine, and I think we're closing the questions on the Zoom.
We're going to hang around for a bit if you...
Yeah, so we'll take one from Zoom, there's one at the back of the room.
That's fine.
So yeah. Jermaine.
Ishmael, thank you. This one is kind of towards Ishmael regarding the executive summary. The example that you gave at the end there, what would be the expected or sort of typical timeline on addressing the controls around that threat?
So the executive summary is after work has been completed. So you will never know. So somebody can't pay lip service to say we're going to go away and implement something. And then not go away and do it. So what we do within the team is we do consultancy, so we do the advice, but we also do the assurance for the organisation as well. So sometimes we will go away and say, we want to go away and see your pen test report. We want to be able to go away and see this type of configuration implemented, or show me the environment. Again, it is very risk-based. Again, we have work that comes in, so we need to go away and move on. So we do triage within consultancy as well. Again, similar to A&E. Oh yeah, you look fine. Your X-ray is not showing anything. Go away. But you might have a hairline fracture. But it's you're there's no point in you occupying a bed here. You don't need surgery. Off you go. So we do triage within consultancy as well. The summary reports are post us closing our loop. And they're our way of saying this is our objective position on the solution that you are implementing. And yeah, crack on basically. Does that answer?
Jermaine, did that answer your question?
I can't hear Jermaine anymore, but he's nodding. So
okay, that's cool. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right, last one to the back of the room.
Thank you.
just wanted to ask, because you keep mentioning about guide trust verify. I just wanted to know a bit more information about that because like it's something that I kind of like want to read up a bit more on.
Okay, so it's just an internal initiative in BT where we train the business to do security as we would do it. So it's an extension of our consultative practice. So we use all of the methods, all of the frameworks, all of the guidance to give people the same perspectives and expectations about the way we do security, train them up to a point where we can call them a security guardian. And then once they've attained that level of training and knowledge, then they can do their own work, do their own security, and assure it for themselves without oversight. And that's something that is actually a lot harder than it sounds. But it's taken us a while to realise what we need to learn in order to get it to a point where it's the same quality as what we do in consultancy. But we're getting there. We're getting there. And again, happy to talk about that initiative. Yeah.
Experience something like of the probation period for an employee?
Yes. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's a bit like training a puppy. Once you can you can trust the puppy off the lead. Yeah. That's when you kind of back away and let the puppy do its thing. But yeah, it's difficult.